Chapter 6 of Alice, or The Wages of Sin. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Shasta, Oakland, California. Alice, or The Wages of Sin by Frederic Werden Pangborn. Chapter 6. A wife is like an unknown sea, least known to him who thinks he knows where all the shores of promise be, where lie the islands of repose, and where the rocks that he must flee. The cardinal rose with a dignified look. He called for his candle, his bell, and his book. Never was heard such a terrible curse, but what gave rise to no little surprise, nobody seemed a penny the worse. The thoughts which were the companions of Albert Thornbury in his room that night must remain unrecorded. The return, as from the dead, of that woman, his wife, had awakened all the memories of the past, and set his thoughts going backward over his life, as he had believed they never could again. His was the case of many, the case of a young man who had made a mistake. Loving with the unquestioning ardor of youth, he had married Cora Tate. Captivated by her houri-like beauty and the charm of her voice, heard for the first time in the opera, and often afterwards in the drawing-room, he had made her his wife. Their union had been peaceful until the business cares of the London house of Dojere and Company had taken so much of his time that he could not be her constant companion, and she had unwisely begun to accuse him of neglecting her. Matters went from bad to worse. The presence of the Count Miguel, a gray-haired sinner who had taken a passing fancy for Cora, aiding much to bring about a rupture between husband and wife, until one night, stung by her sharp tongue, Albert had lowered himself from his dignity to say that which should have been left unsaid. And that night Cora left his home, and he had never again heard of her until he saw the announcement of her death in the newspapers. Then he was touched with a feeling of regret that he had been so hasty with his wife, for he felt that a little forbearance might have kept her his own, and now that she was dead, he loved her more than ever. He had always cherished in his memory a tender recollection of her as she was when his bride, and he felt that he might have even forgiven her had she returned to him penitent. He intended never to marry again, but she was dead. 10 years had elapsed since he had seen her, and men forget much in 10 years, particularly in matters of love. So, in falling in with Alice, it was not strange that he should find that he had changed his mind, and might become a husband once more. In Alice, he had found something superior to that which had charmed him in Cora, a soul akin with his own in thought, a mind refined and cultured like his own, and his love for her had become the great passion of his life. For it is possible, let poets say what they may, that a man may love with a deeper passion at middle age than in early life. It is not always in youth that one finds the wife who is to be to him the partner whom his manhood will desire. The pretty girl who seems to him at 20 an angel of beauty, may fall far short of filling his cravings at 40. What does youth know of the aims, ambitions, tastes, and hopes of manhood? Can he be certain that the girl, so beautiful in her ball dress, so sweet at the picnic, so lovely in the first months, perhaps years, of married life, when all is bright, when cares are few, and ambition is a thing unknown, will be the helpmate of his sterner years, the sharer of his cares and ambitions, the confidant of his purposes and hopes? Does he not often find, as the years go on, that the angel whom he thought so noble has, after all, but the minimum of a soul, the semblance of an intellect, that she is no more capable of understanding his mind than a child, that she can have no sympathy with him in his life work, and no interest in his ambitions beyond that expressed by bread and butter, or perhaps by display and fine clothes? How many men find it worth their while to try to interest their wives in their business, profession, or whatever it may be that is the life of their living, the food of their body and mind? Many do, at start, no doubt, but how many are they who, finding no responsive chord there, give up the hopeless task and go their way alone? Their name is legion. The man comes home burdened with the cares of his profession or trade. He has won his case, his article has been accepted, he has at last completed that machine which is to revolutionize a branch of industry, he has conquered that stubborn case of sickness. In a word, with one thing which makes life grander than mere existence fresh in his mind, and tells his wife of his success, it may be that heavy cares are upon his aching mind, which he had determined to lay aside for the time, while he tells her only of his good fortune. He tells her all about it, with the declamatory ardor of an exalted soul. "Yes, dear," she says, "it's very nice, but I do wish that Sarah might have a new cloak. The one she's wearing is positively shabby. And by the way, the plumber called for his money today." Or she responds with some equally high-toned and agreeable thing. And this is all he gets, and all he ever will get. She has lost her charm. She has not grown any during all these years of life, while he has gone far ahead. She may have been too much burdened with children and cares to have had time for improvement, but the fact remains. She is not his companion. She can never be. He has made a mistake. In Alice, Albert had found a mind akin to his own. She was much younger in years than he, to be sure, but she had what the girl at the picnic had not. At 18, she had become well educated, and knew as much as he did, with his 37 years, of those things which broaden the understanding and make further development a matter of course. She was a fit companion for his manhood, and he loved her as men love, who have made mistakes and have learned to profit by them, knowing the difference between painted and solid substances, the difference between eyes that merely sparkle with beauty and eyes behind which lie a cultivated mind, knowing the difference between schoolgirl tattle and conversation, between society polish and a developed intellect. He loved her and had made up his mind to marry her, when, like a change of scene in a pantomime, appeared the wife of the past. And the wife of the future, the wife for whom his heart yearned, began to vanish out of sight, and the vision of what might have been was all that he had remaining. Cursed by a mistake, like thousands of others, he read his doom, and it both saddened and maddened him. When the morning came, Alice received a note from him, telling her that he had been compelled to go to the city on business, and enclosing his compliments to Mr. and Mrs. Dojere. "Business?" said Mr. Dojere. "I don't know what business could call him off like that. Let me see, puffing out his cheeks and snapping his fingers. "There is nothing at the office to call him. Hum ho, I say, Alice," added the old man, winking at her. "Couldn't you post us as to the cause of his absence?" Alice blushed at the blunt remark, and made answer in the negative, so plainly and with such evident truthfulness that Mr. Dojere was convinced that he had made a mistake, so he dropped the matter, and after breakfast went to the city himself. Mr. Dojere was right. There was no business which should call Albert to town that day. Alice wondered that morning what it could be which had taken him so suddenly away. The thought that he had told an untruth, even a little one, such as the letter might contain, never entered her head. After hearing his opinion of liars last night, she could not think that he would lie, even in so small a way as that. He could not lie. So the girl decided to wait for explanations until he should be ready to give them, a method of disposing of a doubt which it would be well for most people to adopt, and to amuse herself for the day by a visit to some friends farther down the beach. Mr. Dojere bothered in his brains not a little over Albert's sudden whim, as he called it, being always more or less interested in other folks' business as well as his own, and not having any of his own to trouble him just then. This was a failing of Mr. Dojere. He was opinionated, stubborn, quick to form judgments, and poky, as the New Englanders termed it, although good-hearted and just at bottom. And if there was any one thing which Mr. Dojere did dislike more than another, it was mystery. So he bothered his brains. He knew that there was no business which would call Albert away, but when he arrived at his office, he found that there was some business which was not part of that laid out in his day book of matters to be attended to, something which made the old man thoroughly angry and made him very unpleasant company for the clerks. During the night the place had been robbed, and a quantity of fine laces, just imported, were gone. No one knew how it happened, and Mr. Dojere was excited and angry. Albert, who was there before Mr. Dojere, had been investigating the matter, but without success. The goods were gone, and that was all that was known about it. Mr. Dojere was in a state of mind which would have found relief in discharging every man in the place, but not being quite fool enough to do that, he went for Albert, as the boys say, in his bluntest style, with a subject which had nothing whatever to do with the robbery. "Say, Thornberry," he said, "what did you want to go off last night in such a fashion as that for, and then send a lying note about it?" Albert never became angry when Mr. Dojere was mad. He merely looked at his partner, and although his face flushed with anger at the insult, he made no reply whatever, but took up his hat and left the room. "Hum!" said the old man. "Fine set of fellows I've got round here. Let me tell you, there's got to be an improvement in this place before long, or I'll know why." And he settled himself down for the day of first-class dudgeon, and a day of sorry hard times for the clerks, who could not afford, like Albert, to take their hats and leave until the storm should have passed. Albert went about during the day, thinking much over his strange predicament and cruel fate. He loved her, and he knew that she loved him. In fact, he had already shown her, he feared, that he loved her, and she would expect a fuller declaration from him soon. Should he tell her the truth, the whole truth, and trust her nobility of mind to judge him fairly? It would be a hard thing to do. To tell the woman to whom he had only half proposed that the reason he could not marry her was that he was already married. Had he any warrant for telling her this? Perhaps not, but, on the other hand, he knew that she would expect something from him. He could not bear the thought of having her believe him a male flirt, that most contemptible of all two-legged creatures. What to do he did not know. He could not flee altogether. Society would gossip. He was in sore distress, but he made up his mind to do one thing anyhow. He would return to the branch and let things take their own course. Better would it have been for him had he decided to face the gossip's fire. Better 1,000 times had he fled forever from the land. But who knows what is best for him in this world of doubts and dilemmas? And Albert was but one of us, a mortal, with all a mortal's liability to err in judgment. He returned to the branch and took up his quarters, explaining his letter to Alice by stating that his business was finished, and she had too much sense to care to ask what might have been the nature of his sudden call. It was a lie which he had told her, a lie indefinite, but none the less a lie. O man, how well thou canst preach! How pearly dost thou practice! End of chapter 6.